I've got some questions for my colleagues here. I thought the first one I might ask is, you remember that old movie where a young graduate is at a cocktail party and people try to give him advice about what to do with his life? Now, we've got a lot of young people here today, so let me ask both of my co-panelists, if you are giving a young graduate advice, I bet you wouldn't say plastics. What would you say today? Kurt?
Well, there'd be a number of things, but fintech would be high on my list. When you look at the amount of waste in the financial industry, it's trillions. And 10 years ago, you couldn't do much about that. But AI technology, big data, machine learning, blockchain, all these things, if you go to a fintech meeting these days, you see it's like piranha surrounding this, lethargic dinosaur. And they're all getting ready to take bites out of it. That would certainly be one of the ones I'd look at.
And of course, that's something that an entrepreneur can do, right?
Well, exactly. Yeah, it's not going to come from the big companies. I mean, they're going to fight it, but mostly these piranha are going to take bite, and pretty soon a lot of it's just going to go away. So, yeah. When you see that kind of waste as an entrepreneur, you go, oh boy.
Oh boy.
All I need is a few $100 million of this and I got a business, right? And there's trillions of dollars of waste.
Great. Rajiv?
I'm actually facing this issue in real time. I have a 19-year-old son who studies at UCLA. It's costing me a lot of money to send him to school there, as you can imagine. He went to, not graduate school, but undergrad last year, with the interest in doing chemistry. I had a phone call from him last week saying he now wants to move to applied mathematics. So we're already on this journey of what he should be doing. And I think the one thing that I've learned is you don't actually tell them what to do. That's, I think, the biggest mistake that you can make. Yeah. I think you do a lot of listening. You do a lot of inquiry and try and figure out where their passions are.
So your basic advice to a young person is follow your passion.
Yeah. It's follow your passion, as well as I think there are areas, of course, data analytics, connecting neuroscience to technology. Yeah. I think the whole genetic space, I think, is going to see a lot of activity. Cybersecurity, I think, is going to be another big area.
Every area.
So there are tons of opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. If I had to pick one, yours are great. Yours are better than mine, probably. But I'd whisper the word rentals, because I think we're moving to a society where a lot of people are not going to want to own stuff. That's another aspect of the entrepreneurial society. We don't want to own a lot of stuff that we're going to carry around with us.
Can I just build on this a little bit? When I give talks on technology, I put up one slide, and it's got about 12 different technology areas. Every area right now is open for major innovations. And, cybersecurity, personalized medicine. We don't have the green technology. You just go through area by area. I have never seen more billion-dollar opportunities in my life. How many do you think there are? 1, 10, 100, thousands? I think there are thousands of multi-billion-dollar opportunities. But the big but is you've got to do the right things to find them, right? That's the hard part. And we're not finding enough of them. If we found them, by the way, it goes a long way to addressing some of the issues you brought up in the introduction, right?
Yep.
There's an interesting question there, Tammy. You talked about graduates. Somebody's asking about what advice for 3-year-olds.
Right.
And my advice to a 3-year-old would be, try and get a master's in empathy and judgment if you can. That's what's going to be required 20 years from now, because artificial intelligence is going to be about data and prediction, but I think judgment is still going to be key. So I think if you can get a master's in empathy and judgment.
Or ethics.
Or ethics, yeah.
Ethics is another one I would say. I totally agree with that. I think artificial intelligence will help us do all the hard work to find out what are the options that would be equally attractive. And the ethics, the judgment, the empathy to choose the right one is where the human touch will come in. So do I think there'll be mass unemployment? Absolutely not. But do I think we might see a lowering of professional wages because A lot of the heavy lifting of medicine or law, for example, is taken over by AI. I absolutely do. I don't think I'd send my 3-year-old to medical school.
Can I just,
Yeah.
I thought about that. So I think the most valuable gift you can give people today is the ability to become a value creator. I actually don't use the word entrepreneur very much because that's a very special category of people, and there frankly aren't very many entrepreneurs. But everybody in a company can be a value creator. Everybody has a customer. Everybody should be creating value for themselves, for the company or their customers every day in every way.
Yeah.
But you need to give them a framework. I mentioned NABC, which is a very simple thing. But the beauty of that is everybody at SRI knew for everything they did, they had to answer those 4 questions, starting with the customer. Imagine your companies, if every discussion from every person, from HR to finance to your most advanced technology, if every conversation started out with the customer. Do you know how much efficiency there is in that? Do you realize the kind of skills that people develop, the skills that you need to be able to identify these opportunities and be successful? It's really transformative. It's such a simple idea, and it really goes back to Drucker. Focus on the customer. Your job is to create a customer. Start there. If you're not starting there, you're falling behind.
Hey, let's tackle one of these questions that says, that picks up on the word risk. Somebody has said, why do we assume entrepreneurship is risky? I think being not entrepreneurial is more risky. Actually, I agree with that. And then it says, why do we frame entrepreneurship in a correct way? So what do you think about that?
Well, I just said I think you have to be careful where you use it. There are 3 terms that we use here over the last 2 days. One is entrepreneur, which I think of as a set of personal characteristics. Innovation, which is when it's out in the marketplace and it's creating a profit and has some kind of model for sustainability. And the other is value creation. It's the process of being able to create the innovations. And if you want, it's what goes into a playbook. If your people are confused about those 3 terms, it's not surprising they're not as efficient as they should be.
Yeah.
So
I very much agree with that. I mean, my own view is a child who sets up a lemonade stand is being an entrepreneur. That's not an innovative idea, but it's an entrepreneurial idea.
Exactly.
They've invested their capital, their allowance in buying some lemons, and they're setting up a lemonade stand. A pharmaceutical company that cranks 1,000 compounds through a computer program to find the compound that fits in the right receptor and then puts that through a development process to turn into a drug, that's an innovation, but it's not necessarily entrepreneurial. It was, in fact, a pretty industrialized approach to going about finding that particular drug. So the 2 words are very different. Now, can they overlap? Can there be entrepreneurial innovation? Sure. But we have to think, as we think about what we're talking about, what the differences between those might be. And traditionally, the word entrepreneurship has meant the assumption of the financial risk. That's part of what entrepreneurship entails.
You know, I think there's also something about if you just look at the question in a different way, and instead of looking at risk, if you kind of looked at how do you define failure. And for me, a lot of times entrepreneurship is deemed risky because our expectations or how we deal with failure is very different from the way we should be dealing with failure.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of, it's a loop, but it's really about how we change that culture of dealing with failure that makes entrepreneurship less risky or not.
Good point. Now, we had pretty heated discussion last night about government. And Kurt, I know you've got some experience from looking at what government's role in innovation is.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? What is government's role in this whole discussion? What would you add to it?
Well, so there was a discussion about organizations that are successful. In the United States, DARPA, the Defense Applied Research Agency, is the most successful research organization in the world because it is mission-focused. They tackle big, important, paradigm-shifting solutions. They assemble the best teams, and they basically do everything I described. Most government programs don't do that. The National Science Foundation, with their big centers, the big programs in Singapore, they're not terribly effective today, but but they are catching on that the things we're talking about here are now essential. If you don't work on the important problems and put together the best teams, if you don't have an iteration process, if you don't have a toolbox for innovation or a playbook for innovation, you just can't keep up. I'm sorry, you review those programs and they're very disappointing. You've got to do those things. You know, it was okay 50 years ago, but the good news is in the United States and Singapore and other places, people are beginning to realize that it really is that competitive, and you've got to do it if you want to create value. I would tell you one other thing that we're doing in the United States and around the world that's really productive is that part of these programs is to teach the students these skills. And I would tell you, when you meet students who've been through these kinds of programs, they've been transformed. They stop thinking, I mean, I keep on hearing this word risk here, and it makes me cringe a little bit. I don't think of it that way. I agree with the person who said, you know, not doing these things is the risky path. Working on small incremental projects, that's suicide today. If you don't have these skills, that's suicide. When you're in the innovation economy, you've got to have these skills. And fortunately, there are people all over the world who are actually putting these programs together to give people these skills. I mean, we could actually have a whole session here on what's happening in education to give people these kinds of skills so they can thrive in the innovation economy.
Thanks. Did you want to add to it, Rajiv?
No,
'Cause I got one for you.
I actually completely agree about the
Okay.
education piece because
Great. Great. Okay, I wanted to talk to you about purpose. Because I bet you in your innovation index work with Linda Hill do some about that, thinking about company purpose. Can you say a little more about that? How do you help company? What is an inspiring purpose, and how do you help companies come up with that?
Yeah. So I think I think purpose is really a common goal around which people are motivated and aligned. I mean, that's the kind of starting point, and therefore you want to find ways to attract people to come and work with you because they identify with what is the broader purpose of why you exist as a company. And I think a great example of purpose is actually, I noted it down before coming here, is Southwest Airlines. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, given the airline business, they're probably, you know, been the one company that's been profitable irrespective of what's happening in the airline business. And their simple purpose is, we exist to connect people to what's important in their lives through friendly, reliable, and low-cost air travel. Pretty powerful, but I think the key words here are friendly, reliable, and low cost. And how they're making a difference in the lives of people is by connecting them to individuals that they feel they want to be close to, so they can get you there. If you want to look at Google, Google's purpose is organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and available. I think it becomes the kind of North Star when you're dealing with difficult decisions. That is what you can look to say, are we doing the right thing? I mean, interestingly, we're going to have just this discussion at Egon Zehnder in January to reaffirm our purpose as a firm. And what we are defining our purpose, hopefully it will be reaffirmed.
That's nice. It's a really good point. I couldn't agree more. If the purpose can't help me make a choice between this and that, then the purpose probably isn't vivid enough if it doesn't help us choose between multiple options.
And I think it also creates commitment and passion.
Yeah.
I think you attract the right people who want to stay,
Yeah.
and there is a reason to do it, you know, for a bigger purpose.
Very much well said. Let me ask our Drucker Challenge discussant, Mr. Muthsamy, to come forward and ask his question. Hi, come on up. Oh, you're going to stay there? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity and for all the great insight. My question is to Mr. Carlson. You spoke about value creation forums.
Yes.
And the way I understand it, it's a part of the whole learn fast over the fail fast process.
Yes.
And I imagine these forums to be a place of interaction and dialogue where
Yes.
the learning comes out fast.
Yes.
In such a place, how much of a value or an impediment is cultural diversity?
Cultural
Thank you.
diversity. Well, you know, in Silicon Valley, there are fewer people who look like me than you. It's, people come from all over the world, and we consider that to be a great advantage. I mean, there's cultural diversity, there's emotional diversity, there's technical diversity, there's all these different kinds of diversities. And these meetings actually include people from all those different perspectives. And I would tell you, so first off, those kind of forums happened all over SRI. Every group was doing that. They were having regular meetings where people would show up, give their value propositions, be critiqued by their colleagues. You could come, anybody in the organization could come and sit in and learn from them. They were all directed by champions, so these were not people who were assigned. We had kind of a rule. Somebody had to sign up, and we called them champions. That meant they were going to pick a big important problem, they were going to assemble a great team, they were going to learn all the things that we teach them about value creation, they would persevere, they would succeed, no excuses. And people thought this was a little crazy, but it's amazing, in just the point you made, if you give people a big purpose, the chance to actually change the world and something they care about, boy, is that a motivator, right? So we had things like that built into this, but it made the entire organization transparent. So people could see, we could bring people together, and it was independent of hierarchy. You could be an 18-year-old who was an AI expert and come to these meetings and be a superstar. And we did this for everybody, and part of the magic was that you don't create major innovations with one brainstorming meeting. That doesn't work. Or program review meetings. That's after the fact. That's when you've figured out what to do. It's a process of learning. And the first time people would show up, it'd be terrible. The second time they'd show up, it'd be terrible. It'd be terrible. It'd be terrible. But if they were doing the right things, we supported them. If it was a big, important opportunity, we support them. And over time, they learned all these skills, and they were transformed. They were literally transformed. They stopped talking about risk. They stopped talking about culture change. Many of the things we've talked about, they just disappear because you get the skills and you start working.
That's very interesting. Hey, we've got a great question here, at least one I personally love, which is what do we need to do to the education system in order to get young people ready for entrepreneurship? Do you want to take that, Rajiv?
Yeah. So I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think entrepreneurial energy or releasing entrepreneurial energy or being an entrepreneur is about stepping out of your comfort zone. And for that, I think if you look at business schools, you look at our educational system, we kind of have very siloed approach to things. And innovation is all about cross-functional approach. It's all about diversity. And it's all about dealing with conflict and managing conflict. And I think what we don't teach in business schools is how do you deal with conflict? And I think that is something that we really need to focus on. If you'd ask me what subject, I would say it would be fantastic if we learned psychology as part of being a business leader. It's going to be exceedingly important in the years ahead.
Boy, my colleagues are going to be happy to hear that.
Yeah, it's all about human emotion and dealing with human emotion.
Great. Kurt?
So, again, if you think about learning, you say, what are the powerful ways to learn? You've got to do it. I mean, if you read a book on teamwork, okay, good. You go to a workshop on teamwork, okay, it's a little better. The only thing that really works is doing teamwork on the project with your colleagues. That's the only way you really learn fast. So what's happening? In Australia, they're having elementary kids form companies over the course of a year. They're trying to make it part of the national curriculum. Down the street from me, there's a girls called the Girls Middle School. All girls, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. In the 7th grade, they go through a boot camp to learn their playbook for innovation, exactly that. They then form their companies. They pitch their companies to a panel of venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. How cool is that over at Google? They then get funded. They have people like us as their board of directors. They run their companies, and then they break them up at the end of the year, and they pay off their investors, and they get to give part of their money to charity and part of it to their colleagues. And I went to visit these young girls because I wanted to see what they learned. And I said, Linda, what was it like? She said, oh, Dr. Carlson, putting a team together like this is really hard. Have you ever noticed that? I went, yeah, I noticed that. Dr. Carlson, I don't know if you noticed this, but we started to put the team together, and we discovered we all wanted to do different things. So I'm good at sales, so they made me the vice president of sales, and Alice is really good at the financial stuff, so she became our chief financial officer, and we all ended up with a job. And she ended saying to me, Dr. Carlson, Dr. Carlson, I don't know if you ever experienced this, that although this was really hard, it was also a lot of fun. Have you ever noticed that? And I'm standing there, and I'm almost crying, right? And I'm thinking, yeah, I have experienced this, but I wish I had experienced it in the 7th grade.
That's
right?
pretty cool. That's very cool. I want to take a crack at it and also combine it. There's a question here about the generation that comes after millennials, and I've had a chance to do some work studying that. One thing I'd say is I've surveyed kids the age that Kurt's talking about, and about what they'd like to be learning in school. What are their thoughts? And the answers uniformly are extremely practical. They come back and say they want to learn how to start a company, financial analysis, and they want to learn really practical skills. They want to learn electrical engineering and computer programming, and I'm sure fintech and cybersecurity and all this kind of fancy stuff. So they're a very practical group. Most of them, I have to tell me, they don't want to join your company. They don't plan to join your company. They want to be entrepreneurs. Now, are some of them going to join your company? Of course. But they want to be entrepreneurs. That's how many of them tell me they see their future. What else is interesting about this young generation? Well, they are renters. I don't know how many of you in your areas have these kind of meals that you can get where you get one little raw chicken breast and one little package of spice, let's say paprika. And you pay an exorbitant amount for it, far more than you would if you went to a big warehouse store and bought a lot of chicken and put it in your freezer. And I think it's a pretty dumb idea to pay that much for one little serving. But young people love it, and they think I'm pretty dumb not to get it. And when I talked to them about why they like it, one young person said to me, well, I don't have to own a bottle of paprika, duh. And I always think about that when I think about this generation that's coming along. These are people who would feel it onerous to be forced to own a bottle of paprika. They want to rent. They want to have just the amount they need, just the moment they need it. So those are your future employees, and those are your future customers. People who find it too difficult to own a bottle of paprika.
But Tammy, given your experience, how do you see this whole issue about the next generation that's coming, about the limited social interaction that they have? They're typically on their phones, they're rather text than call up somebody. How do you think that's going to impact, when they get into the world of business?
I say, Rajiv, stop before you make yourself sound too old.
Yeah.
Please, please. Shh. These guys have massive social interaction, just differently than the way you do.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Does that make any difference in when they will be entrepreneurs and run companies?
Yes, because they will have much more skill about that. One of the advantages technology gives them is the ability to use it to do a lot of the kinds of things that we had to join an organization to do. They can do it through a technology network. So networks are very utilitarian for this younger generation.
I really agree with you. We've seen no diminution in the quality of the young people we've hired. They want to do great things. They want to have those kind of social interactions. They use the media in a different way. If you give them the opportunity, they're on fire. The only thing, that really worries me is Jeffrey earlier said that, and it's true, the number of companies being destroyed in America now, it's like 200,000 more companies are being destroyed in America than being born. In spite of all the programs, your school, all the things universities and elementary schools are doing around the world, they're giving kids these skills, they want to do it, and yet our ability to create economic impact still, there's something we haven't put our finger on yet to unleash. If there were no opportunities, I'd be really depressed. But we haven't found a way to unleash the opportunities that are in front of us to really transform jobs and meaning and all the things we're talking about at this conference.
Well, we're coming very near to our end. We've got a couple more great questions. I'm sorry we're not going to be able to get to them. We'll stick around for a few minutes after if you want to come up and talk a little further. Let me just ask my two colleagues here to each, I think we've got about 4 minutes, so you've each got 90 seconds to summarize any last message you want to give to this wonderful audience. Rajiv?
Yeah, I think the only message that I want to leave the audience with is we have to reinvent leadership in this new world. And it's not only about unleashing entrepreneurial energy, it's about thinking about how do we do that in teams, and how do we do that in a way that we can incentivize teams rather than individual performance. Because individual performance actually comes in the way of collaboration.
Well said. Kurt?
Well, first off, this is the golden age of innovation. There's never been more opportunities ever in the history of the world. So, number one. Number two, our performance today is actually pretty terrible. Because we're not using the best practices, we're using older best practices, and we need to make that transformation. The good news is, I believe if people step up to this and go from the what to the how, it's time we went from the what. You know, you need to be creative and you need to be all these things. It's the how. The how is the thing. If we can get more consensus and more commitment to the how, I think we can unleash an amazing amount of potential around the world.
Love the optimism. And I'm going to say, get ready for the entrepreneurial society. Hallelujah.